Hi, welcome to today's Yin practice. For today's practice, you might want a blanket, 2 blocks or shoe boxes will work great for what we're using today. You can use a bolster, a pillow from your bed works just fine, or another folded blanket. And I'm also going to set up close to a wall. I prefer that in some of the seated shapes to help my nice tall spine. So if that feels good for you, you can adjust so you're next to a wall. If not, just set up wherever feels comfortable. And we also have Teton, who has his own bed right there, but insists on being here. So he is practicing with us. And we're going to start in an easy seat. I'm gonna put that bolster right up next to the wall and then shift so my hips press against the wall, back body presses against the wall, even back of the head if that feels good. For some bodies, that alignment doesn't feel great. Goal here is to have your chin about parallel with the floor. Finding an easy, tall spine. We use the bolster here under the hips to open some space in the hips. So if your hips still feel tight here, play with extending one or even both of the legs. Not folding forward, but just giving yourself some space. We'll hold these shapes for a little longer. Settling in first here with some movement. On an inhale, drop your right ear towards your right shoulder. When you're ready, look down towards your lap, stretching out the back of the neck. Then roll left ear towards left shoulder. Working to the other side, look down to your lap. Then right ear towards right shoulder. Adjusting the chin placement so it feels good for you. Keep these gentle rocks side to side for as long as it feels good for your body. You might notice you want to spend a little extra time on one side or the other. You're more than welcome to. When you feel ready, feel like these neck rolls are complete, look down at your lap. On an inhale, lift your gaze all the way up, lifting the chin, open the front of the throat, and then settle the neck back to neutral. Taking an easy seat, hands rest on the thighs, upper arms in line with the side body. Finding an active and tall spine, finding some ease in the low body. Allow yourself to settle into stillness when it feels right for you. Breathe here. Check back in with your breath. Notice if the shoulders have started to round forward. Gently roll them back and down the spine. Give yourself another breath here. Nice and slow, we'll shift to our next shape, Malasana. I'm gonna release that bolster out from under my hips. And for Malasana, for Yin, remember we're finding 60 to 70% of our edge. So I'm gonna take a block. And I like Malasana also to be near the wall. Helps me keep a tall spine. I typically like the block on its lowest setting when I use it in a vinyasa class. So for Yin, I'm gonna have the block on its medium setting. Goal here, take your feet nice and wide, wider than hip distance, knees point out towards the side. If you're using that wall, press your hips, your shoulder blades into the wall. You can have your hands resting here on the inside of the knees, or elbows press into the knees, hands at heart. Whatever feels better in your wrists and your chest. Give yourself plenty of time to adjust. Maybe you're stacking more than one block. Maybe you're shifting your position, adding a bolster on top of the block. Whatever works for you to find the shape. And if this simply doesn't feel great, bring your soles of the feet together and sit in a butterfly on the mat. Great hip opening posture right there. When you feel ready in your shape, eyes soften or close. Breathe here. Give yourself another moment here. Resolving to stay still for one more cycle of breath. When that's complete, eyes can flutter open, releasing if you had your hands in prayer. Maybe roll out the wrists a bit. Allow yourself to let the knees fall side to side. Any little slow, gentle movements that feel good as we get out of the shape. Releasing that block and preparing for another seated position here. Again, I'm still using the wall, pressing my spine into that. Coming into butterfly, soles of the feet come together. Now, slightly different than when we fold into butterfly in some of our yin practices. What I want you to do is bring your heels as close to your body as that like 50 to 60% of your edge for yin. So you're feeling sensation, but it's not your full stretch. Let the knees be heavy towards the floor. I like to rest my hands on the knees just for a little weight, not like you're pushing the hands down, but just grounding down. Goal here is to keep a tall spine. So rather than rounding forward, keeping that tall spine, let your eyes soften or close. With this practice where we're focusing on not only letting your body rest and reconnecting, but also counteracting some of those shapes that if you've been traveling quite a bit, our body gets stuck in. So here we're finding a tall spine, slight squeeze in the shoulder blades, a more intentional and tall seat than when we typically round our shoulders forward. Letting the hips be open here as your knees hang heavy to either side. Know that if that feels like too much, the knees need a little support, bring a block under each knee. Give yourself as much time as you need to find the right shape for you. Then settle in to quiet and stillness. Bring your awareness back to your breath. Taking your time here, first release the hands from the knees, shifting your feet forward a bit, then bring the soles of the feet to the mat, rounding yourself forward, maybe slight tuck of the chin to the chest, giving yourself a breath or two right here. Lifting your head out of the shape when you're ready for our last seated position. Teton just got himself all settled on the props. Now I'm gonna have to move him here. Taking that bolster under your hips. Doing a little yogi architecture here. For this shape, we're gonna be folding forward, so you don't need to be as close to the wall if you've been using that, but you may want your blocks in front of you. I also am going to grab an extra blanket as Teton has stolen that one. And for this blanket, you're gonna roll it into a little yogi burrito. By that, I mean it's nice and long, rolled into a cylinder. So here, rolling that up. With your hips settled on the bolster, extend both legs out long, not the widest stance that you can possibly have, but about 70% of it. Slide that blanket under your knees. If that doesn't feel like enough support, you can add in another blanket, making that burrito a little thicker. And when you're ready, folding forward into the shape, hands can rest or forearms can rest on the blocks in front of you, adjusting until you find the height that feels right. Maybe 1, maybe 2, adjust the height settings. Let yourself soften into the shape. Eyes soften or close. Allow yourself to breathe here. Check back in with your breath. Start lifting your upper body out of the fold, nice and slow. Then bending those knees so the soles of the feet press into the mat. You can round yourself forward like we did coming out of that butterfly. Give yourself a moment seated tall, maybe moving the knees just a bit side to side like little windshield wipers. Setting up for frog pose, our last hip opening shape. Give yourself some time. We'll start this shape from a tabletop position. And what you're going to want is your blanket folded into a little square. Doesn't have to be perfect, but I use my blanket here on the outside of the mat. Then from tabletop, take your right knee over towards that blanket, bringing your knees again as wide as feels about like what you do for an extra wide child's pose. Toes are untucked. Begin to sink your hips back. You might come to forearms on the mat or the bolster. And this is where I like the blanket. I can sometimes get a little more of the opening in the hips as I fold into it. So sliding that right knee just as far as feels good. Now this is a yin shape, so we'll still hold it for a decent amount of time, but not quite as long as our other shapes. It is a little more intense. You're finding that 60 to 70% edge. Allow yourself to breathe here. Give yourself 2 more cycles of breath. When you're ready to come out, press the hands into the mat, lifting the upper body, then bring the right knee back under your body. Knees come together. You can sit on the heels here for a moment in hero's pose or thunderbolt. Just allowing yourself to return to the natural rhythm of your breath. Mine can sometimes get a little short in that shape because it's a little harder for me to hold. And this is going to be the starting shape for our next pose. Preparing for a narrow child's pose. I like one of those little yogi burritos. Blanket rolled up between my heels and my hips. And taking that bolster in front of me. Not in between the legs like we typically do with a wide child's pose, but just at the top of the knees, and fold forward, almost bringing the hands under the bolster for a little support here. Allowing yourself to settle into the fold, adjust as much as you need to. If you don't like the bolster, doesn't feel like you're getting enough air, you're more than welcome to release it. Using a block under the forehead for a little support or whatever feels right for you. Settle in. Next breath, begin to lift your upper body out of that fold, walking your hands in closer to your body, and pulling the blanket out from under your heels if you were using it, swiping the heels out from under your body as we prepare for caterpillar, or what we call in our more active practices, seated forward fold. So here I like a lot of props. Bring that blanket rolled up in a pretty thick little burrito under the knees. You can bring the bolster to the thighs here. And then I also sometimes like a block to rest my forehead. Depends on how my spine's feeling that day. So give yourself some time to settle in. Beginning to fold forward, reminding ourselves we're finding 60 to 70% of the edge, so not going into your most intense forward fold, holding it for a little longer, getting a little deeper into those muscles, adjusting your prop setup or placement as you need to. When you feel ready, allow yourself to embrace the stillness.